Hello and welcome to Community Conversations. If this is your first time, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Courtney Shaw and I am the facilitator of the series. I am not the speaker today, though. I will be introducing the speaker. But before I get to that, I do want to say just a little bit about this series. Our theme this quarter is the Pacific Northwest. We have flyers in the back, which I see many of you have picked up. Good. That has information plus also the website. So if you miss one, you can watch the recording or you can watch it live on Zoom. So if you go to our website that's on that flyer, you can click there and be able to take part in this, even if you have a cold that day, right? Or watching things later, or tell a friend about it later. We've got lots of great events coming up this quarter. Next week, we have Danielle Robbins from the Cowlitz County Historical Museum. She's going to be talking about an introduction to the history of Longview. Longview turns 100 this year, so that's a little bit of serendipity for us. But we have a lot of great events, so please come every week if you want. Bring your lunch, bring a friend, enjoy. It's going to be great. Okay, so today we are lucky to have Adam Wolfer with us. Adam Wolfer is a local actor, director, writer, and artist. No one will pay him to do those things, so he works as a professor at LCC. He wrote that. He has taught chemistry and science here for 20 plus years, and for the past 8 years or so, he's been giving me recommendations of things to read, so I really appreciate about him as well. So please welcome Adam Wolfer.
Good morning. So I have to give Courtney some trouble because she sort of talked me into this. I wasn't planning on doing a presentation. Then I said, well, I'm reading a whole bunch of books by Western writers. She said, well, you could kind of make that work. So I kind of made it work. So a little about myself, why I picked what I picked. I was born, let's see, there we go. I was born in Missoula, Montana, right along the Lewis and Clark Trail. And I remember many trips seeing this sign, thinking that was just a normal highway sign, not knowing what it signified, till I got a little older and like, oh, because, you know, they're pointing, so it means you need to go that direction, is what I thought as a kid. Because, you know, I couldn't read Lewis and Clark Trail. And actually, there's one of these within a few miles of us, at least one. Anyone know where I saw one yesterday? If you cross the bridge, head towards the coast, right on the on-ramp, there's one. Because I tried yesterday to get a picture of it, found there's no place to stop safely. So I have a picture. It's a really bad picture, kind of blurry. Also, I had my dog in the front seat, so he wasn't much help. But so I grew up in Missoula, or lived there until I was a teenager. Then we moved to Arizona, and then we moved to McMinnville, Oregon, where I went to high school and lived for a number of years. Then went to college at Oregon State, Corvallis. And then moved from there to the East Coast for a couple of years, moved to Midwest, Colorado, moved back and forth. I won't put number of years because then I can't, guys, some of you will be able to do the math and figure out that I can't claim to be 39. And then after I finished, I went back to Corvallis, got my PhD. After I finished, I went to Lawrence, Kansas, and worked as a postdoc there for a year. And then, come on, there we go. Then moved to Longview. So I've lived most of my life along the Lewis and Clark Trail. And actually this summer, I took my mom to Montana and saw another one of these signs. This is in actually the town where Ivan Doig, one of my favorite writers, grew up, or actually he went to high school there. And so that sign was right along the road. I could stop safely and take a picture of that one. So I'm kind of talk about these books geographically. Start with the beginning of the Lewis and Clark Trail and move along it, talk about books in different areas. So the first is one that's been on my reading list for many, many years. In fact, I've had a copy in my library for many years, which my mom said when she heard I was doing it, said, "Oh, I will lend you my copy of The Big Sky." And I'm just like, trying to decide if I should tell her that she couldn't because I already had it. And actually she said she's going to watch this. She now knows, so I'm in trouble. But The Big Sky, that's what they named Montana for, with the permission of A.B. Guthrie's family. But The Big Sky takes place in the 1830s, 1840s. A Kentucky teenager named Boone Caldwell is not liking his family life. His father is an alcoholic. He gets in a fight with his dad, hits him with a piece of firewood, thinks he may have killed him, decides it's time to leave. His uncle is a mountain man in Western United States, so he figures that's what he's going to do. So he leaves there, heads to Missouri, where he meets up with someone who becomes his partner, good friend, Jim Deakins, and they have many adventures. This is basically an epic story of the mountain men and the fur trappers in the Western United States, mostly along the Rocky Mountain region. So on their way, they meet Dick Summers, who's a seasoned mountain man, and that they become a trio who have a lot of great adventures as they travel through. They get on a boat, which is run by the old style of, you have a bunch of men with poles. They stick the poles in, walk from the front of the boat to the back of the boat, pushing the boat forward, and then they walk backwards. Or they send a whole bunch of people with a really long rope, tie it to a tree, and pull the rope because there's no steam power. And at the time of this, the story takes place is when steamboats were starting to make their appearance, and they said, steamboats will never make it. They'll never be able to make it up the Missouri River. And on the boat, which is owned by a Frenchman, is a Blackfoot Indian woman named Teal Eye. She was kidnapped and taken to St. Louis for whatever reasons. And now the owner of the boat thinks he can trade her for safety when they get to the Blackfoot region, because the Blackfoot region in Montana, what's now Montana, was a very dangerous area because the Blackfeet were not really excited about other people entering their territory. So, as happens in lots and lots of books, Boone falls in love with Teal Eye. At kind of the middle of the book, the boat they're in is attacked by a group of Native Americans. It's not really identified in the book, and Teal Eye escapes. She makes it back to her group, her tribe, which is her brother is now the chief of that group. And the Boone, Jim, and Dick have lots of adventures, including trapping, surviving the harsh winters, going to the gatherings, and about 2/3 of the way, Dick decides he's getting too old for being a mountain man, and he heads back to Missouri, where he's originally from, to be a farmer, leaving Boone and Jim on their own. And Boone decides he's going to go find Teal Eye, who at that point he's never talked to because they weren't allowed to get close to them, but he's decided that that's who he wants as his wife, and they head out. They find the group, Teal Eye and Boone marry, start having kids, have other adventures. It's a one of the things that I found in reading the books I read for this presentation is I still have a great love of history, um, partly because I've always liked history, but I had a wonderful history professor at Oregon State. I ended up taking 3 classes from him that were always at 7:30 in the morning. I knew I must like him for volunteering to sign up for a 7:30 a.m. class. I learned a lot from him and really enjoyed it. Um, but they also made a movie of this, which reading the description of the movie doesn't necessarily follow the book that much, but stars Kirk Douglas, Dewey Martin, Elizabeth Threet, who I'd never heard of, and Arthur Honeycutt, who was actually nominated for Academy Award for his role in this movie. It's by directed by Howard Hawks. If you're into Western movies, you should know that name. He did a lot of John Wayne movies. Someday I need to track down a copy of this, but so one of the last big adventures that Jim and Boone have is the conquering of Marias Pass, which was really exciting for me because at the time I was reading this book, I was less than 20 miles from Marias Pass. Marias Pass is the pass just south of Glacier Park. It's right on the border of Glacier Park. I was at my family's cabin, which is also right along the border of Glacier Park. And someone hires the 2 of them to help him see if it's feasible to run wagons through Marias Pass, because it would be faster, hopefully faster than the more southern passes in Colorado, Wyoming, and even further south in Montana. So they head out in late fall, which is not a great idea in Montana, and they're attacked by a group of Blackfeet warriors who don't want anyone to be using Marias Pass. They had fought many battles with the Flathead Indians who are on the other side of that pass so that the Flatheads would not use it. And so they didn't want anybody using it. So they're attacked. Jim was injured, and they spent many months living in lean-tos in the middle of Montana winter. And for me, it was really kind of exciting to read about it because the descriptions are great, because I've been there many times and actually passed through it this summer. So let's see. In fact, when I took my mom to Montana, it was from my aunt's funeral, my mom's sister, and my cousins were having my mom go through all of her pictures. This picture came up and mom goes, "Hey, that's Marias Pass." There's this monument, it used to be in the middle of Highway 2. It's now moved off to the side, which is probably safer. But this is my grandfather and my grandmother and my Aunt Marion. And then these are relatives of my grandfather, who he did not meet until he was in his 30s or 40s because of the way the family structure worked. He was actually raised by step parents because his mother and father had both died when he was very young. But Marias Pass is here. It's very important to the settling of the West because it's the lowest elevation pass in the Rocky Mountains between the Canadian border and the Mexican border. And Burlington Northern has you can see BNSF has railroad that passes through. This is a great area for people who are train fanatics because they can also stay here at the Isaac Walton Inn, which happened to be on this map, and I couldn't figure out how to get rid of it. So this is a great area to explore, and one I've spent a lot of time in. Okay, so the history was great reading this, as well as ties to my own family and my own life. It's well written, not greatly written. If you want to read this book I need to give a warning. It was written in the 1940s. It's about the 1830s and 1840s. Some of the language is stuff that we would not find appropriate now, especially how the characters refer to different racial groups. We would consider it inappropriate, but for the 1830s, 1840s, it probably was how they spoke. No, I didn't. Okay, forgot I did that. So A.B. Guthrie grew up in Choteau, Montana, which is also pretty close to where my mom was raised. He then went to the University of Washington, didn't like it or whatever. He went to the University of Montana, got a degree in journalism, and then became a journalist in the Southeast for a number of years and started writing about the West that he loved, and then eventually moved back and lived in Choteau for many years. So the first book he wrote, published, was The Big Sky. The Way West is the sequel to that. It's about the Oregon Trail. And he won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction for that. And then the rest of these go somewhat in chronological order as he built up the history of the settling of the West. Fairland is actually chronologically the third, because he skipped many years between The Way West and these Thousand Hills, and everyone kept saying, what happened to the characters in The Way West and The Big Sky? So he wrote a novel that bridged these two. He also wrote a bunch of books that I need to find. They're actually still in print, because I love love mysteries as well. He wrote a set of 5 mystery books featuring a Montana sheriff named Chick Charleston, and his sidekick, who is a local baseball hero. So I've read an excerpt, which was good. I need to find him. But he's also famous because he wrote the screenplay for Shane. After publishing a bunch of books, he decided he wanted to be a screenwriter. That's where the money was. So he went to Hollywood, wrote Shane, was very successful. He wrote another movie called The Kentuckian, which I don't know much about, but then he decided that's not what he wanted to do. He did it for like 2 years. Said, now I just want to write books. Probably because he had more autonomy doing that than writing movies. Didn't have anybody saying, no, you're doing it wrong. So basically the book covers a lot of the Lewis and Clark Trail, and then a lot of these areas. In fact, a big portion takes place here where these 3 rivers come together. And then also up in the Glacier Park area, but also big part in this area where Lewis and his group ran into a group of Blackfoot warriors, and they had been warned Blackfeet were not really going to be happy about seeing them there. And they had a great interaction at first. They all went to bed. They woke up at night, and the warriors, and most historians now say they probably were young, like teenage, early 20, were trying to steal their horses and guns. And it became a battle. It's the only time there was that type of interaction between Lewis and Clark and the Native Americans who lived anywhere along the trail. So Nantamine is, we always exchange book ideas. She's one to turn me on to Agatha Christie when I was like 10. And she also turned me on to many other books. She told me when I was talking about Montana writers, she said, well, have you ever read any James Welch? And I'm like, no. So I found books by James Welch. First that I read was Fool's Crow. Fool's Crow takes place in the 1870s, at the beginning, about the time when the Native Americans' culture is changing drastically because of settlers coming into the Montana plains. So Fool's Crow is a member of the Blackfeet people. He's a member of the tribe called the Piegan, or a subgroup called the Piegan, or in the book it's referred to, and I don't know the correct pronunciation because I only read it, it's Pikuni. So the main character, the protagonist, is White Man's Dog. Later, his name changes to Fool's Crow because of a battle he's involved in and how he brought himself glory in that battle. They changed his name to Fool's Crow. But this book has received many awards when it came out, including the Los Angeles Book. I don't know why it keeps changing on its own. The Los Angeles Book Prize, American Book Award, etc. So James Welch was a member of the Blackfoot tribe, as well as the Gros Ventre tribe. His mother was Gros Ventre, his father was Blackfoot. So he wrote about his culture in this book. And this is the area where they're losing their territory and their culture. Come on. So there's adventures like horse raids where they go down to Crow Village in southeastern Montana, steal a bunch of horses, which the Long Knives or the white men, mostly army, have told them, you need to stop doing that. We're not allowing you to do that. And they signed a treaty saying they wouldn't do it. They kept doing it. Buffalo are starting to be hunted out, which is a big part of their life. They use most of the buffalo for things that they need. And rifles are now going from muskets, which the Native Americans have, to repeating rifles, which they can trade buffalo hides for repeating rifles. And that's a big deal throughout the book of the guys who have been able to do that. But also what the book refers to as white scabs disease, that's what the Native Americans called it, which is smallpox, has now reappeared among the Native Americans. In it, he refers to many historic figures, most of whom are members of the Blackfeet tribe. Owl Child is a person who has decided he's not going to allow the white men to take over territory, so he's become kind of an outlaw, be how the army would view him. He ends up killing a prominent rancher, and that becomes a part of the story. Mountain Chief is the tribal chief who is hiding Owl Child. Heavy Runner is another chief who has decided that he is going to cooperate with the settlers, and actually has a piece of paper signed by the local army general saying that he's to be honored and left alone, which becomes part of the plot. And Joe Kipp, who is Crow Indian who who is part of the army, he serves as a scout. So the end of the book is the Marias Massacre, which I told you I learned a lot of history. I'd never heard of the Marias Massacre, which I think is criminal, since I went to school in Montana. Of course, I left when I was in 7th grade, so maybe they didn't want to talk about that then. But January 23rd, 1870, a group of Army cavalry came looking for Owl Child. And so they're looking for Mountain Chief's settlement, and they've come across Heavy Runner settlement. Heavy Runner settlement's been hit by the by the white scabs disease pretty bad. Most of the adult males in the that are out hunting, and so they attacked that camp at dawn. Joe Kipp told Baker, who was the leader of the group, this is the wrong camp. He said, I don't care, and actually held him under gunpoint. Had one of his sergeants holding him under gunpoint to not so he wouldn't alert the camp. Joe Kipp did actually alert the camp. Heavy Runner came running out with this piece of paper saying, no, I'm a friend. You're to leave me alone. And they shot and killed him. They killed over around 200 members of that camp. Women, children, and older men. There were no combat aged men at the time. They're all out hunting for food. Doesn't make me very proud of how they were treated. But so James Welch, I mentioned a little bit, he grew up is mostly around Browning, Montana, which is where the Blackfeet Reservation is. And his mother, like I said, is Gross Venture. He is a poet and novelist. He actually went to the University of Montana and studied with Richard Hugo. The University of Montana has a great writing program. Many Western writers have been trained there. He's part of what is often referred to as the Native American Renaissance. So the Native American Renaissance, what has three elements according to the person, one of the people who's written about it, is that the reclamation of heritage through literary expression, discovery and reevaluation of early texts by Native American authors, and renewed interest in customary tribal artistic expression, i.e. mythology, ceremonialism, ritual, and the oral tradition of native or narrative transmission. So he and N. Scott Amadei, who is a Southwestern writer, are credited with this Native American Renaissance. And where am I? Other end. So there, that became, at this point, then a lot of Native American writers were getting published by the bigger publishing houses. They were earning awards that were not normally received by Native American authors. And people then also went back and started discovering Native American authors that came before them that probably didn't get the information. Their books weren't out there as much. So he's written several novels, which you're not allowed to tell my wife this, but I went to Paperbacks Galore and I found all of his books, and I'm very excited. I've read 2 of them. So I now have more reading. I need to stop doing these things because I always find more books to read. And then I also make Courtney read more. But he also was awarded the, and I'm not going to butcher the French because I have never studied French, but I believe this is some award for arts and letters. I can translate that much of the French, but which is, I'm assuming not a lot of American writers have received that award. So again, this takes place in this area with some trips down here where the Crow area. And also that's also the area my mom grew up in. She grew up east of there, and the Sweetgrass Hills, which my mom loves because she could see that from my grandfather's farm every morning when she got up, are mentioned by the names that the Blackfeet had for them. So one of the interesting things for me was also that James Welch referred to the geography and the everything in there and the animals by the names that the Blackfeet had given them. So I'm like, oh, that's cool, because it kind of was interesting for me to think about that. His first novel is called Winter in the Blood. Takes place a little bit further east in the Fort Belknap reservation, but originally he conceived it as a poem. His first book published was actually a collection of poetry. So then he started this as a poem describing that area and describing this character he was developing, and then he turned it into a novel. But it's his debut novel. And like I said, it's set on the Fort Belknap. The protagonist is not named throughout. He has a lot of adventures. It's a person who has a very different life than I do. He's basically grows up on a ranch run by his stepfather, actually owned by his mother, but run by his stepfather. And he is mourning the loss throughout of his father, who froze to death in Montana winter when car got stuck, which happens, and his brother, who was killed in a different car accident while herding cattle. But this also was made into a film many years later, like almost 40 years later, which I also haven't seen and I need to find. And I'm running out of time, so let's go back a little bit. This book is, you can tell it was intended as a poem. The descriptions of the area are very poetical. Is that a word? I don't see any English teachers here, so I'm okay. And I've heard rumors that someone on the faculty here says if you have a PhD, you can make up words. So if I made it up, that's okay. So the descriptions are great, and it's an area not it's probably 50 miles east of where my grandfather farmed, but so I know the geographic area, and it has some very interesting characters in the book. And if you read any of the descriptions of the book, that's their focus is on the characters that the unnamed protagonist encountered. So one of them is named Yellow Calf. Yellow Calf is a very old man who is blind, and the protagonist has just figured out that Yellow Calf is blind. He's known him his entire life, but he realizes that Yellow Calf has probably been blind for the last 10 years, and he just never realized, because Yellow Calf lives in a small cabin by himself. But so he comes to Yellow Calf's cabin. "Hello," he said. "You are welcome." "There are clouds in the east," I said. "I cannot look at him." "I feel it. Rain tonight, maybe. Tomorrow for sure. Cats and dogs." The breeze had picked up so that the willows on the irrigation ditch were gesturing in our direction. "I see you wear shoes now. What's the meaning of this?" I pointed to a pair of rubber boots. His pants were tucked inside them. "Rattlesnakes. For protection. This time of year, they don't always warn you." "They don't hear you," I said. "You're so quiet, you take them by surprise." "I found a skin beside my door this morning. I'm not taking any chances." "I thought animals were your friends." "Rattlesnakes are best left alone." "Like you," I said. "Could be." So in a few words, you get a little know about Yellow Calf. In the first encounter with Yellow Calf is wandering around his cabin in the area around with shoeless, in a suit. So he's a very colorful character. But so Fort Belknap is here east of the Marias River region, or Two Medicine region. and it's not far from the Missouri River. Another book is one that my Aunt Leanne turned me on to many years ago. I read it while I was in graduate school, I think. A Yellow Raft in Blue Water. And I reread it for this presentation because I'm like, it's been too long, I don't remember. But Michael Doris is a Native American author. Talk about that, but it covers 3 generations. There's Rayona, who's the daughter. She's African American and Native American. She's grown up in the Seattle Tacoma area, and in the first part of the book is her story, where her mother, Christine, is in the hospital. Christine says, "I'm not dying here in the hospital," and gets Rayona to break her out, and they go back to Montana. And then we have Rayona's adventures in Montana, learning more about her mother and her grandmother. Then go back in time to Christine, starting with her as a child and her brother Lee, who is killed in Vietnam. So that's become a lot of her life is mourning the loss of Lee, who was a few years older and someone she, or excuse me, a few years younger and someone she greatly admired. Then tell Christine's story, who, as she graduated from high school, realized she didn't want to stay on the reservation. She moves to Tacoma, where she works in several different jobs, changing jobs when she was tired of whatever she's doing, and then meets a man who she marries is Rayona's father, and then find out she really is sick. Rayona's not sure. Find out she actually is ill and wants to go back to Montana. So she heads back to Aunt Ida. Aunt Ida may or may not be her grandmother. Aunt Ida refuses to be called grandmother or admit that she's Christine's mother. She's Aunt Ida. So the last part of the book is Aunt Ida's story, basically finding out how Christine came to be and whether she is or is not Christine's mother. Michael Doris was the chair of the Native American Studies department at Dartmouth. It's written over a dozen books, both fiction and nonfiction. One of his other best known books is this book, The Broken Cord, which I've owned for many years. I still haven't read it. I mean, it's depressing, so kind of haven't gotten to it. But he won the National Book Critics Award for general nonfiction. The book, The Broken Cord, is about him raising his adopted son, who has, as they get older, find out has some developmental issues because of fetal alcohol syndrome. And then he wrote this book to describe what that was like. Jimmy Smits starred in the movie about it in '92. And also it led to some here it is. It was credited with inspiring congressional legislation on FAS, or fetal alcohol syndrome. And so he kind of brought that to the attention of more people, and that people started working on it. He also was married to another Native American author, Louise Erdrich, and they have co-written some books together. She wrote the introduction to The Broken Cord, and they ended up getting in a little bit of trouble about The Broken Cord, because some people interpreted both her introduction and his book as advocating for the jailing of alcoholic women who are pregnant to keep them from drinking alcohol and harming their child. Like I said, I haven't read it, so I don't know, but that's one of the things I found. It is a very interesting book. the descriptions of the characters and Eastern Montana are wonderful. And it's one of those where, because it goes back in time and finding out the true story as opposed to what the child knows is kind of interesting. So again, that takes place mostly in this area, though Seattle and Tacoma, a big part of Christine's life. So if you're familiar with that area, you'll hear some descriptions of things you know. And then the next book is one that's been on my shelf for a long time. And I think Chris Tower did a presentation last year on banned books. And he mentioned this book. I said, I have that book. I need to read it. So I got to read it this summer as part of this. But this is a semi-autobiographical young adult graphic novel. So by Sherman Alexie, who's a well-known author, written many books. He's also a movie producer and written several movies. But this is some of the artwork done by Ellen Forney. This is a picture of the protagonist's parents. That the protagonist, Arnold Spirit Jr. or Junior, expresses himself sometimes through the cartoons he draws. This is one of them. This is who my parents would have been if somebody had paid attention to their dreams. Because a big part of this is him realizing when he's a freshman in high school that maybe he needs to do something different so that he doesn't lose his dreams. And so his father was a musician, but never a successful musician. His mom actually would have gone to college if she had the opportunity. So again, Arnold is known as Junior. His best friend is another member of the Spokane tribe named Rowdy, who is a very has a lot of anger issues, and so kind of protects Junior in some parts and doesn't protect Junior in others. It is Junior decides that based on let's see, no, that's not what I wanted to do. Based on advice from one of his teachers, his teacher says, you need to get out of here. You need to go somewhere else because I'm not going to help you to get to your potential. And staying here at this reservation high school will not get you there. So he transfers to high school outside the reservation and starts taking classes there. And he doesn't have an easy way to get there. So he basically hitchhikes or begs rides from people to get to high school. He also then tries out for the basketball team and ends up being very good. So this part is autobiographical. This is what Sherman Alexie did. In high school, he decided to go transfer to a local, and they use the term white high school in the book, local white high school. He played basketball, actually did well, and then went to Gonzaga on a scholarship. Didn't finish at Gonzaga. He ended up going to Washington State, where he eventually finished, and then became a writer. So Sherman Alexie is a writer, poet, screenwriter, filmmaker. He grew up on the Spokane Indian Reservation, which is where this novel takes place. Like Junior, he was born with hydrocephalus. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Also termed water on the brain. So that led to some teasing he got because his head is larger than most. children because of that. His first book was Lone Ranger and Tonto Fistfight in Heaven, which is a short story collection. His first novel was Reservation Blues, which won the American Book Award. And actually, I was in a used bookstore, and I was looking for other books, and I found Reservation Blues, and I said, "Oh, cool! Maybe I can read this." And I read the first couple of pages and went, "I have read this book." This is another book that my aunt had left at the cabin, and I picked up and read one summer. I don't even know how long ago, but all of a sudden I'm like, "Oh, I didn't realize that was Sherman Alexie's book." This is the display from LCC's library. And there's the Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, but it's listed on frequently challenged books. In the last 10 years, it's been on a lot of these lists because of portrayals of alcohol, poverty, bullying, violence, and sexuality. Because why would we want young adults to understand that those things happen in the world? I hate the idea of banned books. I've read a lot of banned books. Sometimes I read them just because they were banned. And some of them I read as a child. And of course, obviously I was hurt by that. So that takes place in Spokane Reservation, which is over here. I'm not sure. No, it's probably further up. Okay. So this book was on the list. The last two books, I'll talk about them quickly, were on the list of the best books of the Pacific Northwest. Because I was, did a search, and on Amazon they had this list. So Winter Kill was one of them, by Craig Leslie. This is somewhat similar to Yellow Raft on Blue Water because it's about 3 generations of a family. Danny, and again, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation because I've only read it. Danny Ketchich is the father and protagonist. He wanted to be a rodeo cowboy. He's still competing, not so successfully. He basically runs cattle. He works for other people. He has some of his own cattle. He's a member of the Nez Perce tribe. This takes place around Pendleton along the Columbia River Gorge. His wife has left him and moved to the Midwest, Oklahoma, I believe, and she died. So he drives there to get his son, Jack, brings him back, and he's trying to figure out how to be a good father. It's like, I don't know how to do this because his wife left him and took her son when Jack was fairly small. So he's not really been a father to Jack, and he wants to do it right. So the story is told in flashbacks to Danny and his father, Red Shirt, and the lessons he learned from Red Shirt about the Nez Perce culture, how to survive in the, hunting and fishing and all the things that in that area they did, and also about rodeo. And so he then starts to use what he learned from his father for Jack. This won several awards, the Golden Spur Award for the best novel and the Medicine Pipe Bears Award for best first novel from the Western Writers of America. He then wrote a sequel called River Song, which I didn't know about until a couple of weeks ago. I knew it was on his list of books he'd written, so I need to go back and read that. This is Further Adventures of Danny and Jack. Here's a list of books he's written, including a memoir about being a father called Burning Fence, which is another book on my to-be-read list that actually I bought from the LCC bookstore many years ago, probably about when it was published in 2005. I have a lot of unread books in my house. I know none of you do, that you read them as soon as you get them. But actually, I lied to members of my department. We had a apartment gathering at my house, and someone saw all the books that we have. I said, Adam, have you read all these books? I read most of them. Most is a relative term. I didn't tell them, but so he's one. Okay. Two of his books were nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. The last book is Trask. I'm not going to have much time to talk about this, but it takes place in Astoria in 1848. Elbridge Task was a mountain man who settled in Astoria, and then he went down over the mountains that are between Astoria and Tillamook Bay and formed and helped settle Tillamook Bay. So it takes place his journey to Tillamook Bay with his two companions who are both Clatsop, Charlie Kewah and Wakila. And then also they run across Kilchis, who is the Killamook chief. Don Barry said this is how they actually refer to themselves. Tillamook is not the correct way. So they refer to themselves as Killamook in the book. Kilchis was fathered or grandfathered by someone who was in a boat that wrecked along the Oregon coast, and he eventually became the chief of the tribe. So he's actually a historical figure, and I think I'll stop there. And if you're interested in mysticism, he puts a lot of mysticism into this book because he was studying Eastern philosophy and Eastern mysticism. So thank you to my wife, my mother, Aunt Leanne. Marn Bowman was my high school English teacher, turned me on to this, and Courtney, you tricked me into this, and also to the Lang and Lit and history department who are going to hire me as an adjunct once I retire. These are books that I was suggested I read or have read, but couldn't incorporate because, like I said, I ran out of time anyway. So,
as always, there's just way too much to read. So hopefully this gives you lots of good options if you are building your to be read list. Real quick, we're kind of out of time, but if anybody has maybe one question we could ask, get in there. Okay.
Can we get a copy of this presentation so we can, because I can't write down all that.
Can't write that down fast enough. What's wrong?
No.
I will send it to Courtney, and they usually post that as well.
Oh,
I'll answer that. My phone here. Yeah, we have these recorded. So if you go to either the LCC YouTube channel or the website that's on the flyer, you can click on this and it'll be posted, and you can go back and either rewatch it or just go to there. Yes, and it's on the YouTube, just the YouTubes. That's what the kids say these days, right? Yeah, so you can check that out there.
Before they don't get introduced, Lindsay and Linda are in the back from the LCC library.
Woohoo!
And many of the books I talked about, they have copies of it, as well as many on this list, as well as others by these authors that aren't on the list.
So thank you very much, Adam, and thank you for coming, and please come again. We've got many cool presentations this quarter. And thank you to the LCC library.